Hi, everybody. I'm Kim Ketch. So I am one of the school counselors. I have students with the last names A through K. I'll let
And
Miss
I'm Jamie Martell. I'm the other school counselor. I have students with the last names L through Z.
Perfect. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to start off by sharing what we have given your seniors. We have two classes of Success 101. So anybody who has students in our class they're going to get this and more. We're going to mother hen them right to death over this whole process. But we've also been in the English classes as well. I think we have one more English class, like an English for Life class to hit. To give students this application kind of packet. We call it our senior college packet. So we're just going to go over this so you know what we have given to students and kind of what we're looking for. All the things that we're showing you or Jamie and I are going to show you right now, it really is information for Jamie and I to gather kind of info to write a recommendation letter for your student. So it's from teachers, parents, and we'll show you the different aspects, but we take that very seriously. We spend a lot of time on those letters of recommendation because we have the same goal as your student. We want them to get into whatever college that they want to pursue and get into. So we try our best to gather all this information so we can help them do that. So this is really just kind of the cover sheet. We don't care about the mailing address, but students write their name. They jot down colleges that just they have in mind. It's not a hard and fast list. Colleges they might be thinking of, majors that they might be thinking of. And we tell all our students, it's perfectly fine to say undecided, have no clue. We'll work with them on that and work individually. So I do want to say, students who are in our success class get all this information, but we also work, besides that, we do the same thing individually with students who are in our class. We have individual meetings. Some students we meet with twice. Some students we meet with 10 or 15 times. It depends on what the needs are. So this is just kind of some information here that they'll need in their application process, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Common App a little bit. So just some information that we give them that they need when they're filling out some applications. So this is information for us, again, for recommendations. And we love these because these are questions that the students answer about themselves. So just describing their college and career goals, personal qualities that they feel that they have that will contribute to their success in college, academic strengths and talents, activities they like in and outside of school, because those are just as important. Colleges want to really kind of get to know students on a personal level. Like, what are your passions? What do you like outside of school as well as inside? Because they can see what they like in school or see how well they do on those transcripts. So some of those other pieces are really important. What do you like best about yourself? What are you most proud of? And then what information would you like me to include in your recommendation? So that could be anything. It could be challenges that they experienced, things that kind of disrupted their learning through their 4 years that we'll talk about with them and include, like if for instance, if a student, had a traumatic loss, say, junior year, and their grades kind of slipped, for us to know that and being able to, validate, why some of those slips happened. So those types of things are what they would write there. Okay, and so this is basically like a snapshot of their entire, 4 years of high school. So here they describe, they put any like work experience that they've done, in the summer, the school year, community activities, volunteer hours that they've done, any school clubs and activities that they've done, honors and awards, anything from, you know, if somebody's pursuing like a STEM or an honors diploma, or it could be high honors, or, you know, that they've achieved throughout their 4 years, music, theater, visual arts. So for students, you know, this is a place for them to highlight, musicals and productions that they've been in, things like that, or like the different bands that they've been in, for instance. And again, this is inside and outside of school. So this isn't just, you know, related to school. Publications, there are some students who are in the yearbook or newspaper. We've actually had some students who have been published because they've been part of a research project, things like that. That's where they would note that. And then we have athletics. So denoting, like, you know, what they've been involved in. And again, we tell students inside and outside of school, because there's a lot of students who are involved in athletics through the summer and through fall, those types of things. So we want to know about that, so we can kind of highlight all of those things. Did they earn a varsity letter? Have they had earned some special honors, like they were a state champion or a, you know, PVC first team, this or that. So this is a great way to highlight those. And then the hobbies or special interests, believe me, it's not an afterthought. Those are things that we want to know about. Like, what are you interested in? What are you passionate about? What are your hobbies? What are some things that maybe somebody, you know, colleges wouldn't know about you, that, you know, they can't look at your transcript, you know, and know those things about you. So again, all of these things are just kind of information for us to use, so we can write an awesome letter for your students. And we want to highlight and, you know, highlight all the really awesome things that they did in our letter. So hand it over to Miss Martell.
So they'll have either 2 or 3 blue sheets in this packet. We explained to them that we would like them to ask 2 or 3 teachers that know them well. It could also be like a UTC instructor or coach. And the teachers, if they're in our building, know what to do with these, and they get them back to us directly. But this is just to help us get other perspectives to include in our letter, so that we have a well-rounded letter for them. So they would put their name on it. If they know where they're applying or their major, they'd put it on there. If not, that's fine. And then they'd ask one of their teachers if they would be willing to fill it out. We stress to the students and to parents that these are not teacher letter of recommendations. That's 2 different things. So colleges want a letter of recommendation from their school counselor, but some colleges also want a teacher recommendation. If a student applies to a college like that, they need to know the difference, that this blue sheet is an internal process to help our letter, and that they would need to ask a teacher separately for a letter of recommendation. So part of their packet is to give 2 or 3 of these out, where the teacher can write their perspective and evaluation of the student. And they're usually really helpful. Sometimes we have great quotes we can include in the letter from the teachers.
And I just wanted to throw out, like, colleges typically, like UMaine, Eastern Maine, Husson, don't require a teacher letter of recommendation. A lot of colleges that are out of state, or more kind of highly competitive colleges, will require those letters of recommendation from teachers directly.
So, and then some of you may have seen this because most of your students have gotten this packet already. So this is a parent guardian brag sheet. If a student isn't living with a parent or guardian, they can pick a significant adult in their life to fill this out. Sometimes students say, do we have to? We really, really want them to, because there's this whole other them outside of school that we also want that perspective. We usually find out great information in these parent brag sheets. If if you keep forgetting to fill out the form and you think of it while you're at work or whatever, we'll accept an email. If you want to type it and attach it, as long as when you email us, you let us know that it's a brag sheet for whomever. But we do like to get this back from a parent or guardian or significant adult, and you can write anything you want about your student there. And then we like to refer to these forms by colors, because this is the one we call a gold sheet. This year it's a little more orangey, but this is not in their packet, but it's a very important step to the process that gets explained to them. This is once they've applied to college, they need to come into the guidance office and fill out the gold sheet. I'll scroll down a little. It's pretty simple. They put their name on it. They put the college they applied to, if they use the Common App or not, the major and the deadline. This is what tells us they have applied to college. We can't just get their packet and start sending information out to places they thought they were going to, because what if they change their mind? We also don't want our information to reach these colleges prior to them actually applying. And we use it for tracking as well. Mrs. St. Louis tracks a lot of information to do with college applications and materials being sent out. So this is the only way we know to do our part. If they don't do the gold sheet, we don't do our part. And, every once in a while we have a student that'll be like, how come you haven't sent? And we'll go look and we'll say, because we didn't know. We don't know what we don't know. So this is how they inform us they've applied. If they've applied to one school, say over the weekend, they applied to one school, they come in and fill out the form. Next week and they do another, they can come in and apply, get another form, that's fine. But if they sat down and applied to 3 or 4 schools in one evening, they can throw it right on this form all at once. And like I said, it's very handy in tracking, and it is a requirement. We will hold them to filling out the gold sheet for moving on in this process. And then there's a pamphlet. It's kind of hard to scan the pamphlet. So right now you're seeing sort of the front and the back folds of it. This is in their packet, and it sort of recaps all the stuff that we talked to them about when we go over these in the senior seminar. So on the very back is useful links, which you'll talk a lot about these different things tonight. The Common App and the FSA ID and College Board, where they could apply for SATs and stuff like that. Our contact information is on there. And then there's a little bit about recommendations and getting help. So there's a snippet about reminding them that they can get help from us through this whole process as many times as they want to. And then recommendations, it's reminding them that, we need the material to do a well-rounded recommendation, and we need it in a timely manner. But also we note in here, a lot of times we get asked by students or parents, can I see my letter? And so we like to explain that the answer is most often no, and there's a reason for that. When they go to apply to college, colleges will ask them if they waive their right to see their recommendation. And if they waive their right to recommendation, we professionally and ethically need to uphold that. When a student asks us if they should, we encourage them to do so, because that's what colleges want them to do. They want them to waive their right to see that. In fact, we've tried it out with some schools before, and if they said no, they don't waive their right, it wouldn't let them proceed. It almost forced them into waiving their right, because they want to know that our recommendations are truthful, factual, unbiased, that we weren't paid off or, something unethical. So once they say yes, they waive their right, we need to uphold that. But we want to assure them and you that their recommendations are to put them in the best light, to promote them, to help them get into college. We wouldn't put something negative. Never encountered a circumstance where there wasn't something positive to write about a student, but if we ever encountered that, we'd have a conversation with a student. So rest assured, the letters are going to be, wonderful and promoting of your student. And we do spend a lot of time, we put a lot of thought and effort and hours into these process to make sure the letter is as good as it can be. And so that's why. So if you or your student gets told, no, you can't see the letter, that's the only reason. And we also use the same letter, usually with a little bit of tweaks, for scholarships. So if they come to us and say, we need a recommendation for a scholarship, we still have to uphold that. Yes, but we're going to send it directly to the scholarship or help them, uphold that still. And then the inside of the brochure, I know you're looking at kind of sideways, just recaps the process, the applying to college process. So we like to have this packet returned to us by October 14th to ensure we have enough time. The exception to that is if they happen to have a deadline that's really, really early. We don't often see that early of deadlines, but sometimes we see October deadlines. So we need to, in the highlighted or underlined section, it says, make sure you're giving us at least a week, because your deadlines are our deadlines. And we have, 100 plus seniors worth of deadlines to write for. So if they have a deadline, they need to have everything in a gold sheet and let us know at least a week in advance. So we'll talk a little bit about Common App. If they're using a Common App, it's kind of like a one-stop shop. We encourage the students, if they're going to apply to several schools, to use Common App, because then we can upload everything electronically. Main community colleges don't use Common App, but their application is pretty quick and simple. And then we encourage them to proof their application, because small typos can send a message they don't want to send on their college application. And then number 4 talks about the gold sheet, making sure that they stop by and let us know when they filled it out. Again, as I mentioned, the underlined section, stressing that deadlines, they need to know their deadlines. We know the local ones, but we can't possibly know the deadlines for all of the colleges out there. So we can help them find them, but it's their responsibility to manage their deadlines and meet them and help us meet them. So fast forward to when they start getting acceptances, it's very important for them to bring them in, their acceptance emails or letters. Mrs. St. Louis will copy them and give them back, and we track all of that. I don't know if any of you've seen our board and guidance, but we put their picture up in all the places that they've been accepted to, and then put a little sticker to the place they decide to go to. That's important information, again, for tracking and data purposes, but also because we need to know where to send final transcripts where they decide to go. But also we're very lucky in that we have a internal scholarship committee to award scholarships to our graduates. And to be considered for those scholarships, we need to know that they're going to college, and ideally where they're going, because some of them are specific to what school or what major or how many years. So super important. They keep us informed as they make those decisions. And then scholarships, if not ones that we would potentially award if they're getting them outside, which we encourage them to spend some time applying to, because free money is good. If they get a scholarship award from the college they're going to, or they applied for one and they received it, we can only announce it at scholarship and award night if we know and have verification of that. So they need to provide a copy, an email, something to us showing what they received, and they need to do so by June 3rd, because it has to be all compiled and prepared for June 8th when they do scholarship and award night. And we can't announce what we don't know, so it's on them to make sure that we know everything that they have earned and want announced.
Gotta unmute before I can talk. Before I talk about SATs a little bit, I just want to put a plug in for those, and I know there's a ton of parents on here. We've kind of promoted our Remind app. We used to just do it for just the seniors, and we're like, I think it'd be good for parents as well, so they can hound kids to get those scholarships done when they see them come in. So when a little bit later on, after our part is done, in the chat, I'll put in how to join this Remind app. You can do it either via text through like your phone or through email. And this is it's an app that we encouraged all students to use, because we post every scholarship that comes in that's an outside scholarship. We will post to Remind, so they can get a jump on them. Something to think about, like we have some filtering in now. A lot of the scholarships really, scholarship season kind of really kicks in like kind of December on, even into that early spring. So don't feel like, oh my Lord, like, my kiddo is not like on top of the scholarships. Like most of them kind of come and open up later on, but the ones that do filter in, we put on Remind, so for parents and students to see. And we also email every single scholarship to the students, so they get it double. Hoping that at some point that we have some time to work on even like our student services website, so maybe a third piece we can post there. But for right now, we have those two venues where as soon as we get something, we're posting there. Mrs. St. Louis is fabulous. So if students come in, we have all the scholarships that we post, like on Remind and so forth, are on like a board. So they can go, if they miss something on Remind, they can go and periodically check out like the scholarship board or ask Mrs. St. Louis who's right in our guidance office, and she can help them out. A lot of applications are online now. They've kind of moved to that arena, but some are still hard copies. So Mrs. St. Louis, like I said, is awesome. She will direct them. Yep, that's online. Here's the information, or she'll physically give them a paper copy. So like I said, I'll put that reminder of how to join Remind in the chat in a little bit. So standardized testing. So we get asked quite a bit. Is now reading the other Mrs. Ketch's. Thank you, Amy. So to start off with, if your student does want to take the SAT, we are hosting it November 5th, and the deadline is October 7th. So coming right up to be able to register for that. If your student needs any help at all with that, have them come see us or shoot us an email, let us know, and we can work with them. So that being said, this is a kind of a question that kids ask all the time, like, do I take the SAT? Do I need to? So it's kind of a little bit of a slippery slope, and we don't give very good answers, but our recommendation is students take the SAT at least once. And the reason for that is because even though there's a lot of schools that are what they call test optional, meaning they don't use SAT scores like they used to for admissions. There are still some schools that will use SAT scores as a means to admit students. So it's, again, slippery slope. You really kind of get to dig in a little bit, or the students do, to see whether or not that school it's required. And like I said, we can help them with that. If we know where they're applying, we can help look for that. UMaine has said that we've kind of gotten a little bit of a gray area. So UMaine has said that they don't use SAT scores for admissions, and they don't necessarily use them for merit scholarships, except there's this little exception. If like a student has like a significant or like kind of a standout SAT score, that it could bump them up a different tier. They could consider that in it. There could be more monies involved. So there's kind of that gray area. So to be safe, no harm, no foul, we've kind of said, take it once. Some students have decided to take it twice. Most colleges they do what's called super scoring. So if I took the SAT in the spring, and then I took it again, say in August or in the fall, they'll take, if my best score for, say, math was in the spring, but my best score for kind of that English language piece was like in the fall, they'll put those together, and that's what they'll use to look at. So we have many conversations with students. Do I send? Do I not send? A good rule of thumb also is to look at we tell students to look at your school. So it's very easy to access what the median SAT score is for their school. So that can kind of help propel them. If they're, maybe below that mean, and it's test optional, probably wouldn't send. If it was here or like kind of above, you could consider sending if that's gonna, boost them into a different spot. But we'd be happy to have those conversations with students, parents, and dig a little bit into that. So that's kind of that piece. They do need to register through through the College Board. So all students have a College Board account. Some haven't used it in a while and have forgotten their passwords. We have most of the passwords we learned over the years that, or like, I know my own kids would be like, I have no idea what my password and my login information was. So we do have that, and we can help them out. I do want to say, if your student wants to take the SAT, because there is a fee, if the fee is a barrier, please let us know, and we don't want that fee to be a barrier. We'll help. We have some means that we can work with that. So please reach out, or have your student reach out and let us know. So the college essay, this we're doing this in our success class right now. We tell our students, and they're like, "Oh, my brain hurts." The application piece is the easy piece. Sometimes the college essay is the toughest piece because students are like, "What do I write about?" So we have in our course, in our success class, we go through the process and brainstorm and things like that. Me and Miss Martell will also be going into, for like students who aren't in our class, we put it out there in our senior seminar, like we gave them this same information. We have this information that we use in our class, and like we'll share it with you. We plan to do during that Coyote time, we plan to make specific Coyote time work times for like college essays, so students can come in, we can help them brainstorm, we can help them like, figure out a topic and work with them on creating that. We recommend, when they do write the essay, to make sure that they have a few sets of eyes on it. We've been through many a training with many different colleges on what they're looking for college essays, but we are not English teachers, so we always recommend, we're good for content and what your direction is. Ask your English teacher to put some eyes on it just to make sure. Another thing is that we tell kids is when they focus on topics is colleges don't want a recap of basically your resume. They can look at your transcript. They can see all the awesome things that you've done, that you've taken X amount of college classes or AP classes, or that you've done all this kind of community service. They're really looking for, this is their time to shine, to show admissions counselors who they are, and what their personality is. I tell kids, I think I went to one of the trainings, I don't know if it was Bates or both, one of those, but one of the admissions counselors said something about, like, if you write your essay and you drop it on the floor and somebody picks it up, and that essay could have been written by 500 people, probably not the topic that you want. You want something that really bodes to you and you as a person, your uniqueness. Like, what are you passionate about? Do you have some of the Common App essay prompts? Thanks, Ms. Martell. So these are the essay prompts from this year. They haven't really changed a whole lot. So 1 through 6 is kind of more focused and gives students a focus on, like, all right, here's something I can focus on, and that's my topic, and I can write it. And then the 7th one they instituted, I don't know, a few years ago, which is like, write about whatever you want. So they really just kind of want a highlight of, a snapshot of who that student is as a person and their character and things like that. What are they passionate about? What do you love? What's meaningful to you? So those are kind of some things that they talk about. And we talk to students about kind of some do's and don'ts about, essay writing. And we'll do that in our little, we do that in our class, but we'll also do it in our little sessions essay sessions during Coyote time as well. If they have like a really cool essay though that they've written for like a high school class, they can use that even. So that's kind of a snippet on that. But we tell kids, if you want to meet with us again 10 times, 15 times, 2 times, like, we will do that for you. Our goal is their goal. We want them to get to where they want to get to. So that's kind of in a nutshell. Again, this is just kind of a little snippet of, like, we host the SAT at Old Town High School on November 5th. And as you can see, again, deadline is October 7th. The late registration is October 25th, which is an obnoxious fee. It's ridiculous. So if your student wants to take the SAT at Old Town High School, they need to hit that October 7th deadline. And like I said, we'll be happy to help them with that. Some of the other deadlines, sometimes, again, you got to really kind of look to see who's available and where they are. We used to be able to say, yeah, Bangor High School offers them like every month, and you can go in, but when COVID hit, all of a sudden, like Bangor High School was like, nope, we're not allowing any other people except our students. So if your student wants to take a test at a different date besides ours, really need to look to make sure that they're open, like for our students and not just their students. So.
And that's it. That's the packet that they get during senior seminar. We encourage them. We ask them that they need to have at least one meeting with us, at least one. We, like Mrs. Ketch said, we can have 10 if they want to, but we really need to meet with each senior, whether they're going to college or not. We want to know their after high school plan, because we can help with other things, military jobs, and we want to know what everybody's plan is. So please stress to your student that they need to make an appointment with their counselor at least once.
And I want to put out there to parents as well, like if you have questions, don't hesitate. Shoot us an email, ask us the questions, let us know. I'm glad I went through it as a parent twice. So I know as a parent kind of how stressful the process is. And then it's made it easier on my end to be like, all right, relax, we got this. Like, and it's hard because this is the next level, and you want your student to go where they want to go and have all those ducks in a row. But I promise we'll do best by your student, and we'll get them what they need. A lot of times, don't stress, which is easy on my end. If I'm stressed, you need to be stressed. But if we're not stressed, don't be stressed. It does take a little bit sometimes when the students apply. They'll be all applied, and sometimes one student, you could have two kids that apply at the same time to the same school. One hears back earlier than the other. Don't read into that at all. It really depends on, because we've asked admissions like what's going on? They're busy too. So it depends on who's in the office that day, how many people they have reading through applications, things like that. I will say this, and I say it 100 times because we say it all the time and the kids still freak out, and we're like, relax, it's okay. So typically when they hit that submit button and they apply, almost automatically, they get an email or some kind of communication in the mail or whatever that says, you applied, but we don't have your transcript and letter of recommendation. Don't worry, because like I said, what we do is we have to wait for till they apply, and then we send things. And there's a lot of things that cross. So they apply, our things are already there, but they haven't been processed yet. So if you're worried about, oh my Lord, their transcript and this and that, it's one of two things. Either it's, there's a cross and our things are there and it hasn't been processed, or a student hasn't filled out their gold sheet. So that's key. And I promise we'll put tons of reminders out for parents too, like, hey, don't forget to bug your student about, have they filled out their gold sheet? And we, like I said, we mother hen all of the students, so we'll drive them nuts too and make sure that, all those pieces are put in place. But again, please don't hesitate to reach out, ask questions, email, whatever you need.
Another thing to keep in mind that deadlines are different per school, or how they review the applications, I should say, even within a school, depending upon the major. So sometimes they review applications as they get them on a rolling basis. In some programs, they won't even look at them until they hit the deadline. So if the deadline is December 31st, they're not looking at anybody's until they've got everybody's, and they wait, and then they start reviewing. So it could be, your student's friend could have applied to nursing at Huston and heard within 2 weeks, and yours could have applied to nursing somewhere else, and they're not reviewing until after that deadline. So keep that in mind too. Also, I just want to throw out there, we're doing an on-the-spot decision day on November 14th. So a rep from the University of Maine, a rep from Huston, and a rep from Eastern Maine Community College will be in the guidance office that day. Students do need to sign up for a spot if they're interested in meeting one, two, or all three of them. And they have to have applied a week prior to that date to those schools. And then what they get to do is meet with a rep and go over their application. And that representative can often tell them if they're in or not. So there's a couple of things that can come out of that. They can hear right then. Sometimes they say they need to take it back to the committee and review. Sometimes they'll give the students some suggestions like, hey, could you send this supporting information, or, you know, maybe take this next semester and it would strengthen your application. But oftentimes they can also say like, you're accepted, your letter will be in the mail soon. And that's exciting for the kids to know early. So if they're interested in applying to any of those schools and finding out, hopefully sooner rather than later, then that information is going out to them and they should sign up.
So one little plug that I have, and Ms. Martell mentioned it, you know, making sure that your kids are giving their counselors a week between their application and the deadline. University of Maine's deadline is December 1st. The amount of kids who hit submit on their applications November 30th and are expecting quality letters of recommendation in less than 24 hours. Okay, the students are going to want Ms. Martell and Mrs. Kakach to write a great letter, and they have all the abilities in the world. But if you give them only a few hours, there's only so much they can do. So please help us help your kids really be thinking, yes, the deadline is December 1st, but their deadlines are our deadlines. They really need to be thinking about that's really got to be a week before in order to get that quality letter of recommendation. So I'm just putting a little added plug in there because they really do need that time to be able to write a good letter. So I think you both hit the notes that I had.
Just
just
one
as
more thing, one
reminders.
more plug. So anybody who is not in our success class, those packets that I went over with like what they've done in school and things like that, parent, guardian, special adult brag sheets, we'd like those like to be brought to guidance, and they can drop it off at Mrs. St. Louis and she'll get it to where it needs to be by October 14th. And don't worry, we'll annoy you and put that out, and we'll annoy the kiddos like October 14th, because that allows us to get these letter of recommendations done and things like that for students for some early deadlines, but also students who might want to do those on the spot decisions. So because they need our letter of recommendation along with their transcripts and things already ready to roll. So, okay, I'm done now.
All right. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, give you guys a chance to stretch, run to the bathroom, grab another cup of coffee, and then we'll transition over to the financial aid part of the program. So I have 6:43. So at the very least, we'll start by 6:50. Not quite 5 minutes, but that's all right. Take some time, stretch your legs. I'm going to pause our recording and then we'll be back. All right, so we're up for the second part of our presentation. Just as a reminder, I had put it in there before, but if you have questions as Mila and Meredith are talking, if you have questions about the first half, go ahead and put those in the chat. Kim, Jamie, and I will all kind of respond to them. We've been around the financial game quite a bit, that if you have financial questions, we can do our best, but if not, I'll stop Mila and ask the questions if I'm not sure of the answer to them. So both parts of this are equally stressful for families. So the college application is probably more stressful for the kiddo, and the financial piece is more stressful for the family. So we have two huge resources for you guys to be able to help. So Mila, I'll let her introduce herself. She has been working with us for years, is a huge expert in the field of financial aid. She works for FAME, which is the Finance Authority of Maine. They have lots of resources for families. But we are really lucky to be in the situation we are because we have a person who's specifically assigned to us, and that's Meredith Lee, who works in the financial aid office at the University of Maine, but doesn't only work with students who are going to UMaine. She is very familiar with financial aid, completing the FAFSA. Even, I've been doing this for years. And when my first kiddo applied to college, I'm like, Meredith, can you just look at my form and make sure I've got all the things in the right places? And that's what she'll do for all of our families. If you need just that one last person to look at it, or if the idea of filling out this form totally intimidates you and you need somebody to kind of walk you step by step, she will do both parts. So it's a huge benefit for our families. No matter what your financial situation is, she can help you figure this out. So Meredith, I'm going to let you start first, introduce yourself, and then talk a little bit about how families can take advantage of this.
All right, thanks, Amy. So I'm Meredith, and Amy just introduced me. So I do work at the University of Maine. I am part of, it's called the MISSY program, where financial aid professionals go in and help seniors and parents complete their FAFSA. And like Amy said, is right from the beginning, or if you want to attempt it on your own. And just have a once over before you submit it. That is what I'm here for. So typically in the past, we've set up in-person certain nights, certain times, but I've been integrating Zoom in with COVID and everything. So I am available to do either in-person or Zoom. Zoom seems to be a little bit better because we can get the students and parents together. Typically it's later in the afternoon. So after I get out of work, 4:30 to, 6:30, 7 o'clock, I will work with guidance to set up dates and times to fill in the appointments. So you guys reach out to guidance, and she will let me know who is available or who wants to have a meeting. Again, it can be walk you through it. You screen share it. I will walk you from start to submit. Creating the FSA IDs. That is more complicated. It's easy, but it takes a little bit more time. So if you can get them done at school, or at least the students done at school, that will knock a little bit of time off. But if you don't have it done, that's okay. We'll go from the very start to the very end, and answer any questions along the way, explain some of the questions. Some of them are a little weird, but that's what I am here for, is just to take you and walk you through that whole process. So again, we'll be reaching out to guidance for dates and times, so you can have an appointment.
Excellent. Thank you, Meredith. And I, again, strongly recommend parents take advantage of this unique resource. Meredith does work with a handful of schools, but not every school is lucky enough to have that kind of individual attention. So we're super happy that we have that resource. All right. So Mila, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I will watch the chat if anybody has any questions. If not, we'll just go forward. All right. Mila,
Great.
you're on.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Hi, I'm Mila Tappan. I do work for the Finance Authority of Maine, but was fortunate enough to get to meet Meredith years and years ago when I worked at UMaine. So I was there for 16 years, and then I've been at FAME for 14 years. And I'm the mother of 2 kids and have been through this process as a parent as well. And it definitely changes it up a little bit when you're going through it yourself. It feels a little more emotional, that's for sure. But our goal at FAME is just to make sure that every family out there has the support they need to get through the financial aid process. So again, you've got Meredith that's there for you as well. So we're just there to back up anything that you might need beyond that. So at FAME, we'd love to have you follow us on social media. If you would like to join our mailing list, we do have texts that we send out, and we also add people to our email mailing list. So that if you'd like to get reminders about things that are coming, and that's not just, hey, the FAFSA is available, but as we move through the cycle, there's information that we provide. So we'd love to have you join us if you would like. And so if you want to, go to famemaine.com/join and just provide your information, and then you will be added to our list. So tonight, what we are going to talk about is the financial aid process. I heard Amy say this was recorded. So if she's going to be sending out the recording, Amy, if it's okay with you, I'll forward you some materials. Maybe you can send along. One of the things that we do have is we have our pay publication, which is the overview of the financial aid process. It is available on our website, so you can just go to our website and get it as well. But you'll notice that as we go through this presentation tonight, down at the bottom, it's going to tell you what page of pay has additional information on whatever it is that I'm talking about on that slide. So we're going to talk about what financial aid is. We're going to talk about the steps to financial aid, the types of financial aid, a little bit about a financial aid offer, when you'll get it, and information like that, and then close with what happens if the aid is not enough and additional resources. So financial aid, you're probably familiar with the financial aid in general. It's meant to be there to help students and families pay for higher education. But there are two broad categories of financial aid. The first I wanted to mention is merit aid. So merit aid is the type of aid that your student might be eligible to receive based on who they are as a student, having nothing to do with your family's financial situation. So the best example of that typically is aid that the admissions office will offer. So sometimes when students are offered admission, in with the admissions office will be something that says, congratulations, we'd also like to offer you a scholarship, for $2,000 a year for the next 4 years. So you might see something like that. There's a handful of students out there who are sometimes eligible for athletic scholarships based on their athletic ability. My oldest son had a roommate years ago who was a great trombone player in the school he was at. That was a big deal. So they gave him some money for that. What all of those things have in common is it was based on the student and what they were offering and bringing to the table. Had nothing to do with the family's financial situation. So merit-based aid is really important, but it is offered by someone other than the financial aid office, the admissions office, athletic department, individual departments at colleges. So when you're looking at schools and your students are applying to schools, please ask them if they have merit aid available, and if so, what your student needs to do to apply for that merit aid. For example, at the University of Maine, it's very simple. The student just has to submit their application, their admissions application, by December 1st, and they'll automatically be considered for merit aid. Okay, so check with the schools about what merit aid is available. The other type of aid is need-based aid, and that's the type of aid we're going to focus on tonight. It is the type of aid that the financial aid office puts together an offer for, and it is based on a family's financial situation. That's what determines how much need-based aid a student is eligible to receive. So how do schools figure out how much need you have? They're going to have you fill out the application called the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. So every school out there uses the FAFSA to determine eligibility for federal financial aid. It's also how we in Maine determine eligibility for the Maine State Grant. And the vast majority of schools use the FAFSA to determine eligibility for their own institutional money as well. So the FAFSA kills a lot of birds with all one stone. So we want to be sure everyone completes the FAFSA, even if you think you're not going to qualify for a lot. The reality is you don't know what you're going to be eligible for until you apply. And additionally, we're finding that there are a lot of scholarship organizations that are requiring the FAFSA to be considered for their scholarships. They're trying to encourage students to apply for all types of aid. So you want to be sure that you do it for that reason as well. And last but not least, even if a student thinks that all they're going to get and all they might get are federal student loans, the only way you can get a federal student loan is by completing the FAFSA. And if a student and family are looking at borrowing at all, the best types of loans out there are federal loans, federal student loans, and I'll explain a little bit about why that's the case at the very end. So we want everyone to do the FAFSA. Some other things you can be doing as you're getting ready to file the FAFSA. We're almost at FAFSA time, but these things can happen as you continue to go through the process, is we want to be sure that people are thinking about schools, not the sticker price of a school, not focusing on how much a school costs up front. That can be a little bit scary sometimes. We've got schools out there like Colby, Bates, and Bowen that are well over $70,000, if not $80,000. So we don't want you focused on that. Instead, what we want you to focus on is what the net price of a school might be. And the net price is the cost of that school minus grants and scholarships. And grants and scholarships are the funds that don't have to be repaid. And what is important to you is how much you actually have to pay, not what the original cost of the school is. And one of the things that we found is that sometimes the more expensive schools can actually be more affordable, because sometimes they have such good financial aid that they are able to offer so much aid that they are, again, more affordable than lower cost schools. So for now, I think what makes a lot of sense is just to research schools, but not to take a school off your list just because it's expensive, because until you see what the financial aid offer is, you don't really know how affordable it's going to be. One of the things that you can do, you and your students, as you're working together on maybe building that list of schools, is to use some resources to find schools that ideally have good financial aid. The reality is that schools vary. Some schools have really good financial aid. Other schools do struggle to provide enough financial aid. So how do you find those schools that have good financial aid? Well, the first thing you can do is use something called the College Board's Big Future website. So you might be familiar with the College Board. It's already been mentioned tonight. They're the SAT people. But part of what they have on their website is this section where you can search for colleges. Now, before I show you something on that website, what I want you to know is that how schools award financial aid is very similar. What they all do is they say, how much does this school cost? Then they figure out how much you theoretically can contribute based on the FAFSA. And what's the end result of the FAFSA is something called an EFC, or an expected family contribution. So they take their cost minus your theoretical contribution, and then what you have left is need. And what schools all try to do is to fill 100% of that need. They'd like to be able to give you every penny that you need. But again, some schools are not able to do that. So one of the ways you can find schools that do is by using the Big Future website. So if you're on the Big Future website, what you're going to find is that behind the scenes, there are about 4,000 colleges out there. So the vast majority of schools in the US are on the College Board Big Future website. And so you need to narrow that down somehow. That's a lot of schools to be looking at. You certainly can look them up individually. But if you're trying to figure out, what might be some good schools to add to the list, you can use this tool. What you might want to do is start with a major. Your student's major might be a good place to start. So what we did is we said, okay, let's look at all of the schools that offer environmental science. So we have now narrowed down about 4,000 schools down to 606. There are 606 schools that offer an environmental science major. But you'll notice once we kind of narrowed it down on that first pass, we have a variety of ways we can narrow schools down further. And one is affordability. If you click on that affordability link, what it's going to bring up is this panel here. And one of the things that you can do is say, hey, I'd like to find the schools that do a really good job at meeting need. I'd like to look at schools that meet 100% of need. And again, that's not all that many, but you could certainly do that. Or you might say, let's do the schools that meet at least 90% of need. That means they do a pretty good job. So let's filter based on that. So what that might do is take your list of 600 schools and narrow it down even further. And what it would include then are schools that on the surface at least look to have good financial aid. So I would love to have families use this tool as they're building their list of schools. We need to have students find schools that are good for them academically, a good match. We want it to be schools that are the right size or the right location. But additionally, we want to be schools that are affordable for them as well. So a good tool there. A couple of other things I want to mention as we push along through this presentation is you might be familiar with Free Community College. So the class of 23 are eligible for Free Community College. And what that technically means is that they're eligible for free tuition and fees. And all they have to do is be, from Maine and living in Maine, and they have to file a FAFSA. And if they file a FAFSA, they are eligible for Free Community College. And I was doing a presentation last night and got asked the question, and that's regardless of your financial situation. So students who are from families that are, struggling financially, this applies to them. But if you're one of those families out there where you've got a good income and you don't think you're going to be eligible for a lot of financial aid, your student, because they're in the class of 23, is also eligible for free tuition at any of the 7 Maine community college systems, as long as they file the FAFSA. So that might be a school that some students say, hey, I want to add add that to my list just so I have some good options. Another program I want you to know about is the Worthington Scholarship. And what the Worthington Scholarship, it has a scholarship if the students go to a 2-year school and a scholarship if students go to a 4-year school. And this scholarship is absolutely amazing, and how much money they're giving out is phenomenal. The big key is the student has to be attending a partner high school, which Old Town is, and they have to be attending a partner college. The colleges that are partner colleges are all Maine-based, so the funds do have to be used in Maine, and are basically all of the schools in Maine, all of the University of Maine system schools, all the community colleges, Husson, Thomas, Bates, Bowdoin, Colby, every school in Maine pretty much, besides not UNE, not St. Joe's, and not College of the Atlantic. But the vast majority of schools in Maine are partner schools. So this is another great scholarship to be sure that your students apply for, because they do have a tremendous amount of money earning and are incredibly generous. But one of the criteria to be considered for this is the student does have to file the FAFSA. So I just wanted to put those couple of programs on people's radar, because it's good to be looking at schools where those sorts of opportunities exist. Deadlines are super important when we talk about financial aid. I mentioned a moment ago that not all schools have all of the financial aid that they wish that they had. So what schools do oftentimes is they have what's called a priority filing deadline, and students who meet that deadline get considered for all of the types of aid that a school has to offer, and students who miss that deadline can still be considered for financial aid, but they're going to get what's left. So that's why we just want to be sure that students make sure they hit those deadlines, both on the financial aid side and on the admissions side. So I would love to have your student go to the webpage of every school that they're interested in and make sure they check out the financial aid section and find out if the school has a priority deadline. And if they do have a priority deadline, make sure they write that down and meet it. The other thing I want to be sure your student does when they're on that page of the website, on the school's website, is to see what applications are required. So it is a given that a school needs the student to file a FAFSA, and that's what we're really focused on tonight. But I also wanted to mention that there are some schools that require an additional application called a CSS profile. Now in Maine, the only schools that require that additional application are Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby. So if your student's going to school in Maine, they're not looking at Bates, Bowdoin, or Colby, you don't need to worry about the CSS profile. But if any of those 3 schools are on their list, or if your student is looking at schools out of state, particularly schools in the Boston area, many of them do require the profile. So it's similar to the FAFSA, it's just a little bit longer, but it can be done, you could do the FAFSA and then do the profile if you need to. Both will become available on October 1st, okay? So moving on, just a couple more things before we get into the meat of the FAFSA. It's great if you've been able to save. I know sometimes it has been so difficult to save. The last couple of years have been really difficult for people. Saving's hard under any circumstances, but if you have been able to save for higher education, that's a really good thing. I want you to know that despite what you hear out there, that saving does not mess up financial aid eligibility. That is a myth. Sometimes people think that if they've saved, that they're going to get less financial aid. And they think that sometimes because they don't get as much financial aid as they wish they did. And they think it's because they saved. But that's not the reason. The reason is just because there just wasn't enough. So saving is a great way to make up some of the difference if a school isn't able to provide everything that you need. So if you've been able to save, that's great. Feel good about it. If you haven't, and you're able to save anything between now and when your student starts school, that's wonderful. And that can be you saving, or that can be holiday gifts, birthday gifts, graduation money, anything that can be put aside to help pay a portion of that bill is really going to make a difference when you get to that point. Last thing on this page, I just want to be sure that people are applying for scholarships. It was already mentioned that scholarships are offered through the high school. Those are the most important scholarships to look at because those are the ones your student is most likely to receive. So be sure you connect with the school's guidance office. But you also can be looking, your student can be looking for scholarships beyond that as well. On our website at faymaine.com/scholarships, we do have a scholarship listing. We have about 150 Maine-based scholarships that your student can apply for. And additionally, we have links to other reputable scholarship organizations. So it's a good place to start beyond the high school when your student is wanting to look at scholarships. Because if they have a school on their list that they're really excited about, but it looks a little bit financially out of reach, scholarships are one of the best ways of making it more affordable. And then there was a mention earlier about, Meredith mentioned FSA IDs. So what an FSA ID is it is a federal student aid account. So federal student aid is who does the FAFSA. The student has to go to studentaid.gov and create their federal student aid account. And when they create their account, what they're doing is they're setting up a username and password that they will use to access everything federal student aid related. So when they go to do their FAFSA, they need that FSA ID, that username and password they set up to get into the FAFSA. It's also how the FAFSA gets signed electronically. And to be honest with you, it's how the student will get, if they want to borrow a federal student loan, it's how they're going to sign a master promissory note. Once they go into repayment on loans, if they borrow, that's how they're going to get into the website. So the FSA ID is something that they will need starting now when they file their FAFSA for the first time, but they'll need it every year as they do a FAFSA because that is required, and they'll even need it beyond when they've finished up school. So it's a super important thing to go ahead and get, and that is something you can get ahead of time. And as Meredith mentioned, it's ideal to get it ahead of time. Just because it breaks things up a little bit, it chunks things into smaller pieces, which I just think makes everything feel a little bit more manageable. So your student needs their own FSA ID, and their FSA ID is tied to their social security number. So when your student is creating their FSA ID, make sure that they're being very careful, that they have their correct social security number, that they know what it is, and that they write down the information associated with that. And I'm going to show you something we have to help with that. So your students absolutely have to have one. Now, you as parents, one parent is going to need to have an FSA ID if you have to provide information on the FAFSA. So it can be, whichever one of you. In my case, I always did all the FAFSA stuff. So I have the FSA ID at our house. My husband didn't need to get one. Next year, there are some changes coming. So I'm not going to swear that the other parent will never need to have one, but for this year, only one parent needs to. Now, as I mentioned with the student, it's tied to your social security number. So for any of you that have older kids out there, and if you went through this process with them and you got an FSA ID with them, then that same FSA ID that you created a couple of years ago is what you're still going to use. So here's what I mean. I, Mila, have an FSA ID, and it's tied to my social security number. I use that FSA ID to sign my older son Alex's FAFSA as his parent. I use that same FSA ID to sign my younger son Noah's FAFSA as his parent. And if I wanted to go back to school and fill out a FAFSA as a student, I would use that same FSA ID. It's tied to me as an individual. So if you already have one, then that's what you're going to use for this student as well. But if you've never gotten one, you, the parent, also need to go to studentaid.gov, create your account using your information, and then that username and password is what you will use to sign the FAFSA. Okay? If you have questions about any of that, let me know, because it is one of those things where, it's not, as Meredith said, it's not hard. It's just, it's just more details that you just are trying to wrap your head around. And I know that makes it a little confusing sometimes. When you're creating your account, just be prepared that they now are requiring, and have been for a bit, something called, they've enhanced it, but it's two-factor authorization or two-factor verification. Do you know how when you get an Apple ID, when I got an Apple ID, I got one Apple ID so messed up that I had to get another one. So I have two Apple IDs, which I wouldn't be able to do with my FSA ID because it's tied to my social. So I only have one. But with my Apple ID, when I can't quite figure it out, sometimes what they'll do is they'll text me a code, right? And I have to use that code and I have to put it into the website, and then I can move forward. That's the way it works with an FSA ID too. So when you're creating your FSA ID, you need to have your mobile phone with you and ideally have email access, okay? So you're going to put in your mobile phone, you're going to put in your email address, and ideally you want to have access to those so you can verify them. And then when you go to sign into the FAFSA, you're going to get that code again and have to enter that into the FAFSA as well. Okay. So really important to be sure that when you're setting these up and wherever you're doing the FAFSA, that it's somewhere that you have access to your phone and to your email. Now, I'm almost done on this topic, but I did want to let you know that because we think it is just so important that students and parents write this information down and keep it in a safe place, we have created a form, and it is available on our website to download. And what it just allows you to do is to write down all those critical pieces of information related to the FSA ID. So there's a section up here for the student, and there's a section down here where the parent can write their information. If you want to use a form like that, it's great, but treat it the same way you would treat a tax return. Just make sure you keep it somewhere safe and confidential. But we find that having this form really makes it easier year after year after year. I personally have a little book I keep all my passwords in. So whatever your method is, that's fine. Do what works for you. But just be sure that information does get written down somewhere, because we do all forget passwords. We swear we won't, but we do. We do have a video if you are interested in watching our video on how to create an FSA ID, so you can find that on our website as well. So Amy, I'm just going to stop for a second and check the chat and see if oh, great. Okay, so I'm just checking the chat, and I'm seeing that students are making their FSA IDs in class. So that's great. So they'll get theirs done, and then they can help parents get theirs, because they'll be all experienced by that. So that's super. All right. Well, we're going to keep moving, because I know everyone will probably love to, have the evening back to themselves. I'm going to talk about the FAFSA specifically. So the FAFSA, again, is the free application for federal student aid, and the 23-24 FAFSA, which is what your students who are graduating next May, the class of 23, need to complete, is going to be available at fafsa.gov. So that's where you're going to go. You're going to go to fafsa.gov. And is going to look like this. So you're in the right location when you see this screenshot here. Now the FAFSA is free, so don't ever pay anyone to submit the FAFSA for you. If you need help with the FAFSA, there's plenty of free assistance. There's Meredith, there's us, there's all sorts of people out there who, that's what our jobs are. We want to help you, and we do it for free. So just let us know what ways we can support you. The FAFSA does have to be filed every single year. But the good news is in subsequent years, you can do a renewal, so it's even easier. So usually the FAFSA can be done in about 30 minutes if you already have your FSA IDs. And when you're doing a renewal, usually it will cut that down to about 20 minutes. So it's really not as bad a process as people sometimes think it has been. Where the FAFSA can be a little bit challenging, and what we've seen the last year, and I'm concerned a little bit about this year, is that the website has been a little clunky and slow. There's a lot going on that website. So if you log in some night and it's just really being a bear, just close it down, do it another night. We want you to get your FAFSAs done early, but when we say early, we just mean in the month of October is great, okay? Even early November, we consider that early. Lots of people do it much later than that, but you're really, really on top of things if you get it done in the next 5 or 6 weeks. So the FAFSA, again, is going to be available on October 1st. We again want you to submit early to meet deadlines, but early being defined as, typically by early November is still considered really early. The 23-24 FAFSA that you'll be completing requires 2021 tax information. So the good thing is about the FAFSA now is that it's using tax information from a year that's already been filed. So that's going to make filing the FAFSA much easier. Because what's built into the FAFSA, when you get to the parent section in the FAFSA, you're going to find that when you're going to put in your information, years ago, it all had to be entered manually. But what happens now is most families are given the opportunity to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So if you file taxes or your student filed taxes, you should have the opportunity to use the IRS data retrieval tool. And what happens is, again, this is within the FAFSA, it's going to give you the ability to link to the IRS to retrieve your tax information and have it transferred back into the FAFSA. And it's really slick. It's just within a matter of seconds, once it's found your tax return, you just click a button and it's back in the FAFSA and it's all transferred. It makes sure that it's accurate, it makes sure it's in the right location, and it just makes filing the FAFSA that much easier. So if you have the opportunity to use that tool, we'd love to be sure that you do that. Now, when filling out the FAFSA, I have been guilty for many years of saying I filed the FAFSA, meaning I filed it on behalf of my kiddos. It really helps, and it's the way that it's set up, to think about the FAFSA as a student application, because that's what it is. So even though we as parents have a huge stake in the FAFSA getting filed and the results of it, the student is actually who is applying for financial aid. So when you're looking at the FAFSA, just keep that in mind, that it is the student that's applying. So the whole first half of the FAFSA is all about the student, their demographic information, where they are going to high school, which colleges they'd like to have this information sent to. Again, all about the student. Now, some students, most students in high school, to be honest with you, do have to provide parent information on the FAFSA. So typically a student who's in high school is going to need to provide parent information. But if you know of students out there who are in foster care, students who are homeless, students who are in the legal guardianship of somebody else, those students typically can get through the FAFSA and don't need parent information. So again, most of the time parent information is going to be needed for high school students, but there are some exceptions. So if you have people that you know of that are hesitant because they've got really complicated circumstances, please be sure that they follow up with someone so that we can make sure that they navigate the process as well. So assuming that parent information is required on the FAFSA, there are often questions about who has to provide parent information. Now, if parents are married to each other, biological or adoptive parents are married to each other and live in the same household, then both mom and dad's financial information will go on the FAFSA. If it's a situation where mom and dad live in the same household but aren't married, still both parents' information is going to go on the FAFSA. But if it's a situation where parents are divorced, or maybe parents were never married and they live in separate households, then what you're going to do is you want your student to think about who did they live with most over the last 12 months. And whichever parent they lived with most during the last 12 months, that's the parent who's going to provide financial information on the FAFSA. So imagine I'm the student. My parents were divorced. I live with dad 60% of the time. I live with mom 40% of the time. Because I live with dad more, it would be dad's financial information on the form. Believe it or not, mom would not have to provide any financial aid, any financial information on the FAFSA. Okay. Now, there is one more piece to this. If dad is currently married on the day he files the FAFSA, then his spouse, my step-parent's information, would also be required. So identify which parent has to provide information on the FAFSA, and if that parent is married on the day the FAFSA is filed, then their spouse's information is required as well. And I know people hate that answer, but that is the way that the regulations read. I'm going to mention one more thing, and I do see we have some things in the chat, so I'll stop at the end of this slide and just see where we're at and see if there are any questions I need to address. But as mentioning, when you start the FAFSA, the first half is all about the student, and then you provide some parent demographic information, and then some parent financial income information. And then the section is about parent assets. Parent assets have very little impact on the financial aid eligibility. I mentioned that a minute ago when we were talking about savings. And part of the reason is not everyone even has to provide asset information. Most families who earn under $50,000 a year are able to totally skip questions about the assets. If you earn more than $50,000 a year, you will have to provide asset information, but I want you to know there are some significant assets that are excluded from the FAFSA. These are always excluded from the FAFSA, at least as of the FAFSA this year, okay? The first one is your primary residence. So when you're thinking about filling out the FAFSA and you're figuring out what you need to have available, one thing you don't need to worry about is how much your home is worth, how much you owe against your home. Your primary residence is completely excluded from the FAFSA. Additionally, if you've been saving for retirement, if you've been putting money aside, you've got, over here somewhere, you've got that pot of money that's in an officially designated retirement account, that is also completely excluded from the FAFSA. And still again for this year, if you have a small family-owned business with fewer than 100 full-time employees, then the value of that small business is also excluded from the FAFSA. So you may be wondering what's left. So what you would need to provide in the asset section on the FAFSA, assuming you have to fill out that section, would be things like cash, checking, savings, non-retirement investments, second properties, college savings plans do have to be listed, and things of that nature. But assets, just at the end of the day, often don't even have to be listed. And even if they do have to be listed, have very, very little impact on financial aid eligibility. So once you finish up that section, then the student provides their financial information and then the FAFSA is done and it can be submitted. So I'm going to stop for a second. I'm going to look at the chat. If we do have questions.
Mila, the one question we had was just about retrieving an old account. So we answered that one.
Great. Okay, super. Yeah, and as long as you have access to your cell phone and the email that you set up, retrieving the account is very, very easy. So that's just why it's so key to write that stuff down. And that actually is one thing I did not say that I should have said, which is when your students are creating their FSA IDs, ideally they should use something other than their school, their high school email address, because they do want to be sure it's an address that they're going to have access to, or an email that they're going to have access to going forward. So if your kids haven't already, it's a great idea to set up like a Gmail account, so that Gmail account can be with them now, it can be with them when they're in college, and it can be with them after they finish college, that it can, be an email that they will continue to have access to. So if that's possible, great. If they've already set it up with their high school email, no big deal. They can go in and update that email whenever they're ready. All right. In that case,
Mila, could you just, we do have a question about inclusion of assets. Somebody had asked a question. Can you just quickly go back through what assets you need to include?
yes, I sure can. So, yes, I hope I'm not the one freezing. I don't think I have a super connection tonight, everyone. I'm sorry. You know what I'm going to do too, you guys, is I will send the form that we have that has this listed. So if you want to share that when you share the recording, that would be super. It's on our website too.
Yeah,
But
I can
here's
do
what
that.
okay. Oh, great. Thank you. So here's what you do include. You include cash, savings, checking account. You're going to include non-retirement investments. So if you just had, some stocks and bonds or mutual funds or something like that, but they weren't retirement, then you would list those. You would also list a college savings plan, like a 529 account. NextGen is the one we have here in Maine. And then you would list any second properties that you have. So your primary residence is excluded. But let's say, for example, you own a camp, then you'd want to figure out the value of the camp minus any debt owed against it so that you knew what the net worth was. So you would only need to list the net worth of any separate properties. And in the camp example, let's just say that, it was worth 150,000 and 50 was owed against it. So its net worth was 100,000. And let's just say it's a shared property with, 2 siblings, and you only have to count half of that. The only half of your half would have to be listed on the FAFSA. So those are the biggies. Personal possessions like cars and boats and snowmobiles and four-wheelers and all of those things are completely excluded as well. It's just not an asset heavy form, okay? All right, so I will continue on.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We had one more question. So somebody had asked, what if my income will be changing?
That's great. And if you don't mind holding on for just a second, I am going to address that. Does that sound okay?
Perfect.
Okay, super. Okay, so once the FAFSA is submitted, it takes 2 to 3 days to get processed by federal student aid, and then they're going to notify the student that it's been processed. They're going to let them know that it's ready to review. They don't have to review it, but I really, really recommend that your student go back in and make sure that everything looks okay. What they generate when the FAFSA is processed is something called a student aid report. It's a summary of all of the information that was included on the FAFSA. So it's a great idea for students to go back into FAFSA.gov, just like they did originally, to sign in with their FSA ID, their username and password, and just to review the information that was listed on the FAFSA to make sure it's correct. One year, I've been doing this, you guys, for 30 years, right? But I was doing one of our FAFSAs. Well, my son was applying for financial aid, and I made a mistake. I was hurrying in a way I wouldn't hurry with all of you, but I was hurrying on my own stuff. And I just transposed a number. And, it's because I went back and I looked at the student aid report, I realized I'd made a mistake. If you make a mistake, it's really easy to fix it. You just want to be sure that you know if you made a mistake. So great idea to go back and review the student aid report. You can also add colleges to the student aid report after you filed the FAFSA. So let's just say your student's ready to file the FAFSA in a couple of weeks. And your student has to have at least one school that they list on the FAFSA. But let's say they just have like 2 or 3. But then over the next month or 2, they decide that there's another school or 2 that they want to apply to. They can go back to FAFSA.gov, log in with their FSA ID and their username and password, excuse me, and they can see the student aid report that we're seeing here, or this form here, and they can just click on update school information, and they can go ahead and they can add additional schools to the FAFSA. So, and the good news is that those schools will use the original filing date when determining deadlines. So that's a really good thing. Okay. So go back, double check that. Sometimes a scholarship organization will also want a copy of a student aid report. So if you hear someone say, we need a copy of your SAR, you know, we use an acronyms terribly in financial aid. If someone says they want the student aid report or their SAR, this is where you go. You go back to studentaid.gov, you log in with the student's FSA ID, username and password, and that's where you can access and download that SAR. So as far as the types of aid, I'll just mention, you know, very high level stuff for tonight. There are scholarships and grants. Those are the best types of financial aid. In the federal realm, there's the federal Pell Grant. You might be familiar with that. That's the biggest of all the federal grant programs. The state of Maine has the Maine State Grant. That's up to $2,500 for full-time students per year. So that's another nice grant that can really make a big difference. In order to be considered for the Maine State Grant, all a student has to do is file their FAFSA by May 1st. So for the class of 23, that means filing the FAFSA by May 1st of 2023. So again, I hope you have it done long before that, but that's what the deadline is. And then again, schools themselves may have money that they're able to offer. And then there are private sources of scholarships. So usually when you hear about a scholarship, usually a scholarship is merit-based, based on kind of who the student is and what they bring to the table. And then grants tend to be need-based. That's not 100%, but that's the difference between a grant and a scholarship usually. Bottom line is either one are great because they're funds that don't have to be repaid. Then there's a type of aid called work study. And what work study does is it allows a student to get a job, typically on campus once they've come to school, sometimes off campus, but they work in this job and then they get a paycheck. And they can use that paycheck for their expenses. So you might say, well, why is that considered to be financial aid? Well, why work study is financial aid is because the money that the students get paid with, the vast majority of it comes from the federal government. So the federal government gives the school a bunch of money, and the school uses that money to pay students to work in various jobs on campus. So work study is a fabulous program for students. It's a great way to get some experience. It's a great way to earn some extra money, a fabulous way of making connections on campus. But the one thing I do want to mention about work study is that it is not helpful in paying the first semester of the bill. And the reason is because when the student gets a work study offer, they actually don't get the money until they start working in the job, which isn't going to be until they arrive on campus in the fall after that first bill was due. So some financial aid offers are going to make this really clear. They're going to break out the financial aid really nicely. They're going to have grants and scholarships listed this place. You know, they're going to separate out work study. They're going to separate out federal student loans, but not all do that. So sometimes you're going to see a financial aid offer where everything is lumped together, and it might not be obvious that work study does work a little bit differently. So I just wanted to give you that heads up that work study is a fabulous program. I love students having work study, but it's really meant to be used for, you know, the next semester, or for books the next semester, or for spending money or laundry money or money to go home over break. It does not help get that first semester bill paid. And then there are student loans. And I wanted to mention specifically federal student loans. So federal student loans are going to be included on virtually every student's financial aid offer. So you are going to see that most students are going to have a federal student loan of $5,500. Students are eligible for a federal student loan simply because they filed a FAFSA and they're a matriculated college student. So they're attending college, they filed a FAFSA, that gets you a federal student loan. Again, first year, $5,500. These loans are not credit-based, and they are not needing to be co-signed. Parents, you are not having to, you know, put your name on any piece of paper related to any federal student loans. So these are in the names of the students only. So that's most parents think that's a really good thing, but it does mean that they are limited. 5,500 for a first year student. In coming years, it will be 6,500 and then 7,500 for the last 2 years a student is an undergraduate. So federal student loans are very different. Not just that they're not credit-based, but when these loans go into repayment, there's lots of flexibility with the repayment. They can even be forgiven under certain circumstances. So, we could do a whole session on federal student loans. I certainly am not going to do that to you tonight, but it is one of those things where, if you ever want to talk with me or with Meredith about federal student loans and understand kind of the pros and cons and benefits of them and how they work, we're happy to do that. There's lots of information out there and on our website. So just be sure that if your student is looking to borrow, that you know kind of how a federal student loan is different. And if you need to borrow beyond that, how those loans work. So the financial aid offer will come eventually, but to be honest with you, it will be a little bit. So we talk about getting the FAFSA filed, like in the month of October, kind of hurry up, but then you wait, because you're not going to see your students not going to receive a financial aid offer until they're offered admission. So, many schools will, try to get admissions offers out there as quickly as they can. But again, depending, as was mentioned earlier tonight, depending on their staffing and who they have available, it might take a little bit before your student is offered admission. So don't worry about the fact that you're not getting a financial aid offer in the meantime. That's not going to come until after they're offered admission. Typically, we see financial aid offers starting to go out, usually in December, but sometimes it's not even till January or even a little bit later with some schools. So, don't worry about that. Don't get, stressed out that it hasn't come yet. If you have any questions about when the school will be sending a financial aid offer, just call the financial aid office or send them an email and just say, when do you expect to send them out? And that might just help you, set your expectations and know when to be on the lookout. Which leads me to another point that I want to mention. When your student becomes an applicant to college, things really start to transition. So far you've been used to getting mail at home that will say, to the parents of, right? It's addressed to you, even if it's for your student. But colleges are going to deal with your student directly. All of the correspondence, even all of the financial aid stuff, is going to be sent directly and only to the student. So you want to be sure that your student has a conversation with you and you with them about how they're staying on top of the information that's coming from a school. Most of the time, the schools want the student to set up an email account with that school once they're offered admission. And many schools prefer to communicate with the student via email. When it comes via paper, it's easier, right? So if it came, even if it was addressed to my son, if it comes in the mail, I'm going to see it on the counter. If it comes in an email, I have no idea it was sent. So it's really good to have that conversation about making sure your student is checking their email on a regular basis and that they are forwarding to you or letting you see anything that they get that's related to financial aid if they need something from you. My youngest son will still say to me, Mom, I don't email, I text. And, he's learned that now that he's in school and college that, he does have to do a certain level of email, even though he wishes he didn't. It is how schools communicate and provide information. So the sooner they can kind of get used to that and get comfortable with that, the better. And we just want to be sure that they don't miss any important notifications. So eventually you will get financial aid offers. Your student may apply to a variety of schools and you might get several financial aid offers. And comparing those offers can be a little bit challenging because, as I mentioned a moment ago, every financial aid offer is going to look a little bit different. Some are going to lump all the aid together. Some are going to segment it out by type. Some schools are going to be really helpful and put the cost of the school right on the financial aid offer. Others don't do that. So what we have put together is this form. And if, again, this is one of those times if you want to join our text list or our email list, this is a form that we will share once we get to that point in the year. And what this form does, I know you can't really see the details here, but what it does is it allows you for school A, for example, to put in the cost, tuition, fees, room and board. And then you can put in the grants and scholarships, the money that doesn't have to be repaid. So what it allows you to do is say, okay, what's the net cost of this school? Tuition, fees, room and board, minus grants and scholarships. That's what that school is really costing. Now, I know you've got books and there's some other expenses, but we're focusing on the big ones. So you do that for school A. For school B, tuition, fees, room and board, grants and scholarships. How much does the school cost? School C, tuition, fees, room and board, minus grants and scholarships, how much does the school cost? So then what you've got in front of you is you've got a form where you can look across this one line and you can see how much the schools are going to cost. Because the reality is, as I mentioned earlier, some schools that are expensive are actually more affordable, sometimes in schools that are a little bit lower cost. So this form can help you get that apples to apples comparison. Now, you don't need to use this form. You can just do it with pen and paper. You can set up an Excel spreadsheet. I've seen some very fancy ones through the years. However you do that, but I think it's really helpful, just to get that apples to apples comparison. So again, that's on our website. We'd love to have you use that and take advantage of it. We have an electronic version that will even do the math for you. All right, we are almost done. And this is the piece where we talk about the question that came up in a moment ago, where I said, if we could hold tight for just a minute, I'll get to that. When you file the FAFSA, you are listing 2021 income information. So sometimes that is no longer accurate, especially in these times. If 2021 was a year that was good for you, and now your income has decreased, then what you want to do is you want to be sure you follow up with the school. You're not going to make any changes to the FAFSA. You have to file the FAFSA using 21 income information. But you can go to the individual school and say, look, this is where we're at now. This is what our income is. We've experienced a decrease in income, and schools can take a look at that. They call it an appeal, or you having special circumstances. There are a couple of different names for it. But at the end of the day, I call it an appeal. I think that's the easiest. And just let them know that your income has changed. Usually they'll want some documentation of that. But the ideal situation is that they would take that into account. They would use your income, that's your current situation, and reevaluate your financial aid offer. But that's not the only time a school will reevaluate your situation if you ask them. Let's just say that there's a separation or divorce. There either has been since 2021 taxes were filed, or there's one that happens in the future. You'd want to talk to the school about that. Sometimes we have families that have really, really high medical expenses. I met a mom the other night at a session I was doing, and she's really struggling with long COVID, and she just said her medical expenses are through the roof. And, so that's something that she wants to talk with the school about. If you have significant out-of-pocket expenses, you want to let them know that. I think one of the things that's really helpful when you're doing your FAFSA, think about what's on that form. So think about the information that you provided. That's all the school knows about you. That's all the financial aid office knows about you. So if there's anything else going on in your world that's impacting your ability to help pay for college, you want to be sure that the financial aid office knows that, because if they don't know, they can't do anything about it. And that's how they spend a lot of their time, is working with families to reevaluate their situation, to learn new information that they didn't have after the FAFSA was filed. So yes, please be sure you check in with any school that your student is hoping to attend. Even if it's a couple, it might be a situation where in the spring there's 2 or 3 schools that your student is looking at, and you want to talk with each one of those schools, because it might be that what the decision is that the schools make impacts what schools the student ultimately chooses. And last but not least, sometimes the financial aid isn't as much as we hope it would be. And so what do you do then? And so one of the things that we're a really big fan of at FAME, and it's in part, to be honest with you, because many of us have had kids ourselves and we've kind of gone through this process, we like to think about paying for higher education as a piecemeal approach. And what I mean by that is, if we imagine a piece of pie at Thanksgiving, or a whole pie at Thanksgiving, the more pieces you cut that pie into, the smaller each individual piece is going to be. So if you can have a whole bunch of different sources, even if they're not super large, to help pay for higher education, that's going to make it easier. So already we've talked about things like merit aid. We've talked about things like need-based aid. We've talked about scholarships. And then some other things that can be helpful are the savings that we talked about. So even if the savings, there hasn't been a lot of savings to date, any little bit that you can do between now and when your student starts school, that's fabulous. And I think an important conversation to have, and again, this is based on my personal experience, is to talk with your student about money, to talk about, my oldest son was one of these kids, maybe some of you have these. He was the kid who had spent his paycheck before he'd worked the hours. Any of you have any of those kids? So we had to have some really serious conversations about his summer employment and his savings and what the expectations were, and I'll say we were pretty honest with him about what we could afford and what we couldn't. And those are hard conversations to have, but they're really, really important. And I think the earlier you can have those, it makes everything a little bit easier. So talking about savings and what's possible is a really, really good thing. Another thing that can make paying for higher education a little easier is setting up a tuition payment plan. A tuition payment plan just allows you to spread some or all of the balance out over a period of months. So maybe you'd start a payment plan that starts in July, and you have July, August, September, October, November to make payments. So it just makes the payments a little bit more manageable. I think of it a lot like braces. When the kids had braces, to pay all of it at once would have been impossible, but to spread it out over a period of months made it a little bit more manageable. Now, these are not loans, so you're not paying any interest on these. There is typically a small enrollment fee, maybe $35 or so. It depends on the school. So those can be a good way of paying, a portion of the bill. And then, of course, loans are another way in which some families pay the remaining balance. We do have information on our website regarding loans. So if you need to look at that, we'd love to have you start there. We talk about, not only the different types of loans, but just make sure that people know, different things that they might not have thought about as a way of bringing down their costs. So, it's a pretty comprehensive set of information there. So you can check that out. And then something that people don't always think about, because why would you? But when we talk about this piecemeal approach, sometimes it's not money that you have initially, but it's money that you have later on. So if you're paying for part of your student's tuition, when you file your taxes in a subsequent year, then what you're going to find is that you might be eligible for a tax credit. And that tax credit can be up to $2,500. So that can really, really reduce the amount of taxes that you owe and result in you getting a larger refund back, for example. And if that's the case, and if you're able to set aside maybe some of that excess money that you got because of the tax credit, then you can turn around and use that, again, theoretically, for the next semester. So again, that piecemeal approach is really just taking all of these various pieces and kind of pulling them together. And hopefully making it a little bit more manageable when you're paying for school. We have some resources that are available in Pay. That's that electronic booklet that I showed you at the very beginning that we'll include the information on. It does have checklists in it. So on page, I think it's 24, you're going to find the senior year checklist. And so it's more than just financial aid related stuff. But I find that it's easy to get a little overwhelmed with this. There's a lot going on, and having a checklist that's broken down so that I can focus on my fall stuff, and then my late fall stuff, and then my winter stuff, and then my spring stuff just makes it feel, again, a little bit more manageable. And then we have other resources. We have informational videos, we have tools and calculators, we have a whole variety of publications, we have FAFSA help sessions, we have scholarship searches. In everything we do, we kind of thread financial wellness through it. So we have a bunch of resources on that topic as well. And then this is the last slide of significance. Well, no, I have one more, I'm sorry. We'd love to have you sign up for texts or emails. You can go to famemaine.com/join and do that. We do have a Facebook group. If you want to join our Facebook group that's for parents and caregivers, you can go to Paying for College for Me and join. We would love to have you with us. We don't have students as part of it just because we want parents to be able to kind of talk freely about some of the challenges that arise sometimes with paying for higher ed. And we also do individual counseling as well. Now, I know you've got Meredith, so you guys are probably all set there, but if you need us, we do make appointments and do Zoom sessions as well. This is my last slide of significance. We also have some FAFSA help sessions coming up. Now, again, if you prefer to meet with Meredith, that's wonderful. And she's going to make sure that you are all taken care of and you will be in super good hands. On the other hand, if you felt like, you know what, I think I just want someone to look over my FAFSA and, I don't know why Meredith, she would be available, but I'm just trying to think of a scenario where you might want to, look somewhere else. We do have these FAFSA help sessions. And so one of the FAFSA help sessions that we have is on October 19th. We're having one at UTC in Bangor. And because we know gas prices are a significant issue for many families, we are giving every student who attends a $20 Irving gas card to help with the gas to and from the session. So if that's something that you'd like to do, we'd love to have you. Again, I know you're in really good hands already, but if you think that you would like to do that, we'd love to see you there. So that is it, everybody. We have a 1-800 number, we have an email address, we have a website. But I will stop there for a moment because you have heard me talk long enough tonight, I'm sure.
Mila, we do have a question that I'm not sure the answer of.
Mhm.
Does financial aid take into account the GI Bill?
No, so this is wonderful. And this is a change that in all my years in financial aid, it changed dramatically, and it changed after 9/11. Veterans benefits that the student is eligible to receive, and I mean education veterans benefits specifically, the ones that are used for education, are completely excluded from the FAFSA and the whole financial aid process. So basically, if I know a student has those benefits, I want them to fill out the FAFSA. I want them to see whatever financial aid they might be eligible for, and then they get their veterans benefits on top of that. So it's really a great scenario if people do have those benefits, because they are in addition to any of the other financial aid that a student is eligible for, and they do not get reported on the FAFSA.
We did have a question about the free tuition
Mhm.
at EMCC, and the only thing I want to add, Kim had answered the question, but the thing that we learned about the free tuition for those who were thinking EMCC is they're going to apply the federal monies first, so Pell Grants, those type of things, then the state money to cover tuition. And then if the student has scholarships, that would be returned to the student in the form of a refund. Students who get scholarships don't lose that money.
Right.
So
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's so, so exciting about that program. And again, community college is not necessarily, what the pathway that every student wants to take. But for those students who are interested in it, and that's where my youngest son is right now, and it's been a great experience. And he's not even eligible for the free tuition because he graduated earlier than that. But yeah, students can get, their federal money, and then they can, potentially get some, so that their tuition is completely covered. And let's just say we have a student who is not eligible for a Pell Grant, is not eligible for a Maine State Grant. So the free college program is covering all of their tuition. But let's say they do get the Worthington, then they can get the Worthington on top of the free tuition and fees, and use the Worthington to pay for, some of their housing expenses, for their gas expenses, for their book expenses, and all of that. So it's really an amazing opportunity for students, to get a great education at a very low cost. Again, not for everybody, but a good option for many students.
I do want to put in a plug in for the Embark program for EMCC. So we put this out to students. So the Embark program is kind of a collaborative between many schools, but us and EMCC. If you have a student who's interested in going there, there's an opportunity for students to earn a scholarship of up to $2,000. I think we give out like 5 or 6, and it's very minimal, really very minimal anything on the student's part. They meet with an Embark representative, Paige Dobley, who's fabulous, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and kind of like me and Jamie, at the EMCC level, to kind of bridge that gap to make things easier. They help with financial aid, they help with classes, all of these things in leading to going to Eastern Maine Community College. So we put this out to students, but if you know that your student is really honing in on Eastern Maine Community College, please have them email Miss Martell or myself, so we can have them, we can work with them to get this application done, because that $2,000, could go towards things like transportation, books, things like that. So shoot us an email and let us know so we can help with that.
all right, so I'm going to stop recording.